Picture this. You wake up Monday morning and a loaf of bread costs $5. By Friday, that same loaf costs $15,000. Not in some distant medieval kingdom, not in a video game economy, in real life, in 2018, in a country that should have been the wealthiest nation in South America. Nicolás Maduro didn't fall because of a military coup. He didn't fall because of sanctions alone. He fell because he committed the most spectacular act of economic self-destruction in modern history. He took a country sitting on more oil than Saudi Arabia, more gold than most nations will ever see, and he turned it into a graveyard. Today, we're going to dissect exactly how economics became the ultimate weapon. Not against an enemy, against his own people. This is the story of how you destroy paradise with a calculator and a printing press. Let's rewind to 2013. Venezuela is about to experience something that sounds impossible on paper. Imagine you're the CEO of a company that owns the world's largest oil reserves. 300 billion barrels of liquid gold sitting under your feet. You have beaches that look like screensavers, fertile land that could feed millions, an educated workforce, hospitals, universities, infrastructure. You have everything, and I mean everything. Now here's the question that economists will study for generations. How do you take all of that and lose 80% of it in a decade? How do you make your currency so worthless that people literally use the bills to make handbags because the craft value is higher than the face value? How do you make 7.7 million people, that's 1 in 4 citizens, abandon their homes and walk through one of the deadliest jungles on earth just to escape? This isn't a story about politics. This is a story about numbers. Cold, hard, unforgiving numbers. And those numbers are about to reveal something terrifying about what happens when you ignore the basic laws of economics. Let's start with the first domino, the oil trap. When Maduro took power in 2013, Venezuela was pumping nearly 3 million barrels of oil per day. The government had spent decades doing what economists call catching Dutch disease. Here's what that means in plain English. When you make so much money selling one thing, in this case oil, your currency gets incredibly strong. That makes imports cheap. Why grow tomatoes when you can buy them from Brazil for pennies? Why manufacture cars when you can import Toyotas? So Venezuela stopped making things. They stopped farming. They stopped building. They just pumped oil and bought everything else. It worked perfectly as long as oil stayed at $100 a barrel. But there's a problem with this strategy. You become completely dependent on one thing, and if that one thing breaks, you're finished. Here's where it gets catastrophic. Years before Maduro took power, the government fired nearly 20,000 engineers and geologists from PDVSA, the state oil company. Why? Because they went on strike. They were replaced with political loyalists who knew absolutely nothing about maintaining oil infrastructure. By the time Maduro was in charge, the pumps were rusting. The pipelines were leaking. The entire operation was falling apart. But Maduro needed cash to stay in power. So instead of fixing the oil rigs, he treated the oil company like his personal ATM. Need money for a rally? Take it from the oil company. Need to pay off a general? Take it from the oil company. Maintenance budget? Delete it. Production collapsed. From 3 million barrels a day in 2013 to barely 800,000 by 2025. And at its worst in 2020, it hit just 337,000 barrels. Imagine owning a bakery and firing all the bakers, selling the ovens for scrap metal, and then acting shocked when you have no bread to sell. That's exactly what happened. The golden goose was dead. But surely, when the oil money stopped flowing in 2014, the government cut spending, right? Oh no. They did something much worse. They looked at the central bank and said one word: print. This is where the story goes from bad to apocalyptic. In 2013, inflation was at 56%, worrying but manageable. By 2015, 180%. By 2016, 254%. And then the dam exploded. In 2018, inflation hit 130,000%. Some estimates for early 2019 put it over 300,000%. Let me give you a visual. On Monday, an egg costs $1. By Friday, that same egg costs $3,000. Prices weren't changing by the month or even by the day. They were changing by the hour. Restaurant waiters stopped putting prices on menus because by the time you finished your appetizer, the price of your main course had doubled. The currency, the bolivar, became literally worthless. It was cheaper to use the bills as napkins than to buy napkins with them. People started weaving purses out of cash because the craft value was higher than the face value. The economy wasn't running on money anymore. It was running on panic. People would spend their entire paycheck the second they got it, buying anything they could find: tires, rice, bleach. Because holding money was like holding melting ice. Every second you waited, you lost value. This destroyed the one thing every economy needs to function. Trust. Trust that this piece of paper means something. Trust that if I sell something today, I can buy food tomorrow. Maduro set that trust on fire and watched it burn. But if you think hyperinflation was the worst of it, wait until you see what happened to the food. In 2016, a dark joke started spreading through the streets of Caracas. They called it the Maduro Diet. The punchline? It gets you skinny, but it doesn't make you fit. It wasn't funny. But when you're starving, humor is all you have left. According to university studies, in 2016 alone, 75% of the population lost an average of 19 pounds. Not from exercise, from skipping meals, from hunger. The supermarket shelves went bare. So the government created something called clap boxes. On paper, it was a food relief program. Subsidized packages delivered directly to households. In reality, it was a leash. If you protested against Maduro, no box for you. If you didn't vote for the party, no box for you. If your neighborhood voted opposition, maybe the delivery truck breaks down that week. But here's where it gets even darker. Investigations revealed that the government was importing low-quality food, often unfit for human consumption, at massive markups. They were buying powdered milk with virtually no nutritional value, billing the Venezuelan state millions, and pocketing the difference. While children were fainting in schools from malnutrition, the regime's inner circle was getting rich off the very hunger they created. They turned starvation into a business model. Think about what that requires psychologically. You destroy the farms so people can't grow food. You destroy the currency so they can't buy food. And then you say, "Don't worry, I'll feed you." But only if you kneel. This broke something in the Venezuelan people that no political opposition ever could. You can't fight a revolution on an empty stomach. And so they made a choice. If they couldn't vote Maduro out with a ballot, they would vote with their feet. Since 2014, roughly 7.7 million Venezuelans fled the country. That's 25% of the entire population. To put that in perspective, imagine if every single person in Texas just left, or if the entire country of Switzerland packed up and moved. This is the largest displacement crisis in the history of the Western Hemisphere. And who left? Everyone, but especially the people you need to run a country. Doctors, engineers, teachers, oil technicians. Picture a hospital in Caracas in 2019. The power goes out because the electrical grid failed. The backup generator doesn't work because the parts were stolen. And the surgeon? He's not there. He's in Miami washing dishes because his surgeon's salary in Venezuela dropped to $6 a month. This is the hidden cost that destroyed Maduro in the long run. He didn't just lose money. He lost the brains to fix the money. When the oil rigs broke down, the people who knew how to fix them were in Houston. When the power grid collapsed, the electrical engineers were in Madrid. He was left ruling a country of ghosts and the elderly. And then came the moment that made it all visible to the world. March 2019, click, Venezuela went dark. Not for an hour, not for a day, for nearly a week. The Guri Dam, one of the largest hydroelectric plants in the world, which supplies 80% of the country's power, failed. Maduro blamed a cybernetic attack, orchestrated by the US. He literally claimed they hacked the dam from a laptop in Washington. But the engineers who were left knew the truth. Negligence. They stopped maintaining the substations. They stopped replacing turbines. They let the system rot until it gave up. When the power died, the water pump stopped. You're in a tropical country, 90 degrees, no air conditioning, no fans, and now no water. People were scooping water from polluted rivers just to flush their toilets. But the real horror was in the hospitals. Neonatal incubators turned off. Dialysis machines stopped. Patients died simply because the machines keeping them alive had no power. By 2020, Venezuela had officially entered the twilight zone. Walk down one street and you see people digging through trash for food. Walk down the next street and you see shiny new stores selling Nutella, PlayStation 5s and imported champagne. How is that possible? Because Maduro did the unthinkable. After years of screaming Yankee go home, he quietly legalized the US dollar. He stopped trying to control the exchange rate because he literally couldn't anymore. Suddenly, Venezuela became a two-tier society. Tier 1, the 95% earning bolivars worth nothing. Tier 2, the 5% with dollars. Government cronies, military generals, people with family abroad sending money home. This created a bubble of luxury that gave the illusion things were getting better. But it was a mirage. The economy wasn't producing anything. It was just washing dirty cash through luxury imports. And where was the regime getting actual cash to buy loyalty? They turned to gold. Maduro looked at the Venezuelan Amazon, one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, and said, dig it up. He created a mining zone bigger than Portugal and handed control to a mix of military officers and actual criminal syndicates. They use mercury to extract gold, poisoning rivers and killing fish. The gold gets flown out to places like Turkey, the UAE or Iran, sold for cash, off the books, no receipts, no taxes, just bags of money delivered to the presidential palace to keep the inner circle happy. By this point, Venezuela wasn't a state anymore. It was a criminal enterprise pretending to be a country. And it gets worse. US investigators tracked what they call the cartel of the suns. Why suns? Because Venezuelan generals wear sun insignias on their uniforms. The allegation is that the government essentially became the logistics department for drug trafficking. When you control the radar, the ports, the airspace, you don't have to hide from the police. You are the police. But here's the problem with being a narco state. It invites heat. The US Department of Justice put a $15 million bounty on Maduro's head. They weren't looking at him as a politician anymore. They were looking at him like El Chapo. Think about the psychology of that. Every time Maduro walked into a room, he had to wonder, does that bodyguard want to protect me, or does he want $15 million? And then came July 2024, the election that could have saved everything. The opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez crushed it in the polls. A 70-30 split in many estimates. Maduro had a choice: accept defeat, negotiate an amnesty deal, retire to a beach somewhere with his millions, and let the country recover, or steal the vote and doom the economy to eternal isolation. He chose to steal it. He announced he won, refused to show the voting tallies, arrested protesters. The US said deals off. Sanctions snapped back. Foreign investors packed their bags and left. This was the moment the verdict was truly signed. He proved to the world and to his own military that as long as he was in charge, Venezuela would never make money again. He was the blockage in the pipe. So what happened on January 3rd, 2026? Why did it all finally collapse? Because the economic math hit zero. Reports suggest that in the last months of 2025, cash payments to the top military brass started arriving late, or lighter than usual. The gold mines were being squeezed. Drug routes were getting intercepted. The loot was running out, and that's when the incentive structure flipped. For 10 years, the incentive was protect Maduro, get paid, stay safe. But on January 3rd, the math changed. Protect Maduro, go down with the ship, hand him over, maybe get a deal, maybe keep some money. When Delta Force landed, they didn't face thousands of troops fighting to the death. They faced a regime that had already hollowed itself out. One kick and it all came down. Here's the final bill. GDP contracted by nearly 80%. At its peak, over 90% of the population lived in poverty. 8 million people forced into exile. A currency so worthless it ceased to exist. Nicolás Maduro is in a cell in Brooklyn. But let's be clear about what actually defeated him. It wasn't just politics. It was a refusal to accept the laws of reality. He thought he could print wealth. He couldn't. He thought he could eat oil. He couldn't. He thought he could rule over ruins forever. He couldn't. Economics isn't just about money. It's about life. It's about the surgeon who can't save a patient because there's no power. It's about the mother who can't feed her child because the currency is worthless. It's about the 8 million empty chairs at dinner tables. There will be trials. There will be headlines about justice. But there's no courtroom big enough to hold the true scale of what Venezuelans have been through. Maduro is gone. The nightmare is over. But the rebuilding? That's going to be the hardest work of all. Venezuela is free of the man. Now it must free itself from the wreckage. So here's my question for you. If a country with the world's largest oil reserves can collapse this completely, this fast, what does that tell us about the fragility of any economy? What happens when the people in charge stop caring about basic math? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this deep dive opened your eyes, hit that like button and subscribe, because the story of how Venezuela rebuilds is going to be just as wild as the story of how it fell apart.